Welcome to the Tomorrow's World Today podcast. We sit down with experts, world-changing innovators, creators, and makers to explore how they're taking action to make tomorrow's world a better place for technology, science, innovation, sustainability, the arts, and more. In this episode, George Davison, who is also the host of Tomorrow's World Today on the Science Channel, sits down with Matt Mattioda, the chief forester at Miller Timber. He dives into the game-changing advancements in forestry technology that are revolutionizing the industry, boosting efficiency, enhancing safety, and making forest management more sustainable than ever.
Let's open up our conversation today, Matt. Just kind of curious about how your company got started, if you could run us up to speed on what your operation does, and then can you talk a little bit about Ponsse and the founding of that organization?
Sure can. Thanks for the introduction. I appreciate that. So our company is Miller Timber Services. We're based out of Philomath, Oregon, on the West Coast. We're a full-cycle forestry services provider. Full cycle meaning we work with the trees from the time they're planted as little seedlings, all the way through caring for those trees as they grow, protecting those trees from wildfire, and then harvesting the trees when they're ready to be harvested.
Interesting. How did you get started? Can you tell us a little story about the entrepreneur or that started this venture?
Sure. Our company was founded by a gentleman by the name of Lee Miller. Lee is an entrepreneur, and he came up with this idea of he wanted to work in the woods. He grew up in a forested environment and wanted to have his own business. So he went to school at Oregon State University, the College of Forestry, and upon graduation, did the equivalent of starting a business out of a garage. He started it with a chainsaw and a pickup truck.
Good for him.
Yeah. So he started out there doing manual labor in the woods, cutting brush and thinning out small trees, and as slowly the business started to take off, and he hired his first employee, a longtime friend of his, and the business continued to grow, and now we have about 150 full-time employees and about 250 in the middle of active fire season in the middle of summer. So we've since moved on from the pickup truck, and now we have three facilities. We have one in northern Idaho, one in Oregon, and one in California that we just purchased recently.
Wonderful. And while you're doing all that work, you also are working with all sorts of unique equipment, aren't you?
We are. These Ponsse machines are fantastic. They're a great group of folks, and they're very innovative in their designs and the approach of how we manage and harvest and thin forested environments.
So it might be a little hard in this kind of a venue to describe what these machines do for you and your operators. But could you describe it a little bit so that our audience can understand what the Ponsse machine is doing?
Sure. So if we were to step back in time a little bit, maybe 40 years or so, a lot of trees were cut by hand. Be a gentleman with like Lee started with a chainsaw and a pickup truck, and they'd go out to the forest, and they were going to thin trees or harvest trees, and they'd go out and they'd pull out their chainsaw and put on their ear protection and chaps to protect themselves, and they'd go cut down a tree by hand, just the old school way, just not with an axe but with a chainsaw. So step forward to where we're at now, and we use these Ponsse machines, and the Ponsse machines do the same thing. So instead of Lee being out there, let's say, with a chainsaw in his hand, you be in the machine, and you're controlling the machine almost like a video game, and the machine reaches out with its arm, and it has a chainsaw on the bottom of it, essentially, grabs the tree, falls the tree, and then what it does is, just like someone would need to cut the limbs off the tree to make a log to go to the sawmill, the machine actually pulls the tree through this harvesting head, delimbs it, measures the length and diameter as it's pulling the tree through, as it's feeding through the tree, and then it gets to the place that we've predetermined with a computer where we want to make logs based on certain values, pauses, the chainsaw bar comes out again, and bucks the tree into logs.
What an innovation. So we are harvesting a tree, and instead of falling a tree and letting it hit the ground and then going by with the chainsaw and cutting every little limb off, then you'd have to pick it up. This sounds something like out of a Dr. Seuss book where the device picks the tree, holds the tree, cuts the tree, then pulls the tree through a tube and delimbs it, cuts it, and stacks it. Is that a fair way for our audience to think about this?
So yes, that's a great way to look at this, and we can do it faster and, more importantly, safer than we could by doing it by hand. So we're taking a lot of people out of harm's way by putting them inside a protective cab that's designed for safety. So a lot of folks that work in the woods can get hurt very easily with falling trees and walking around in the woods, but you put them inside an enclosed cab, now you're in an environment that's safe for you. So it's not only it's more productive, it's also safer.
That makes a lot of sense. When we first opened up the conversation, you were talking about managing the forest and harvesting from a seedling all the way up and through. There's a lot of responsibility in proper management of the forest, isn't there? There's
a lot. And the decisions we make today may last 20, 30, 50 years. So foresters have to have a long-term view of things because our impacts last for long periods of time, and those decisions last for long periods of time.
So in the world of that you operate in, I imagine there are all sorts of different types of jobs that need to be filled. If somebody wanted to get into your field, how would they do that?
Great question. So if you were to want to get into forestry, there are several really good forestry schools in the United States that can help point you that direction. Within inside of those colleges and there are universities, there are different forestry programs related to different aspects of forestry. So a forest engineer, they typically lay out road systems, lay out harvest units, things of that nature. They have a little different role than I'm schooled as a forester. So my role is actually in the growing and tending of the trees and the forestry cycle, and what we call silviculture. And there may be other folks that are related in fish and wildlife positions that work with foresters to help make decisions about what we do out there. So there are a variety of career paths that one can take.
Let's unwind you a little bit if we could. You started out somehow. Can you give us how you started out in the world and kind of take us on a little path forward?
Sure. So I grew up in the eastern part of the Bay Area in a town of Walnut Creek, which is a suburb of the San Francisco Bay Area. Middle-class family. My dad was a general contractor. So I would go out to the job sites with my dad, and he'd be building a house or adding on the house, and I was always fascinated by wood. I just loved wood and working with wood, and Dad would bring wood home. So as my brothers and I would play with wood, build a tree fort and all those kind of things in the backyard. So I liked wood. And then, as a family, we'd go camping. So we'd go up to the Sierras in California, go up to the mountains, and we'd go camping and just loved being out in the woods. And so we're trying to figure out, what do I want to do when I graduate high school? I was kind of thinking, I don't know, right? What do I want to do? But I really like wood, and I really like camping and being out in the woods. Well, forestry sounds good. So I applied to a couple different forestry schools in the United States and got accepted and decided to go to Oregon State is the one I chose to go to. And so I got up there at Oregon State, went to school, and I honestly knew very little about forestry at all. I couldn't even tell you what a Douglas fir tree was, and that's the predominant timber species we deal with in the Northwest, and I couldn't identify one. I knew that little. I just knew I liked trees, and I knew I liked wood. I started with very little, and from a suburban environment, I just knew I wanted to do something out there, and just kind of learned. And I had some great mentors in summers when I was going to college. So they have programs there where they're hooking students up with mentors in the industry, kind of like an internship programs for the summer. And so a lot of students, they sometimes they rotate around with different companies or different organizations every summer. I end up having one that I really enjoyed right out of the gate and at the career fair, and I worked with them all every summer when I was going through school, and I was hired on full time after.
That's wonderful. Those mentors mean quite a bit to us when we're younger, don't they?
They do. I learned so much from them. Of course, I learned a lot in school. I learned a basis for a lot of what we do. The scientific background, the decisions and why we make decisions, but then I learned a lot of the practical came from the folks in the field that I learned from and their experiences actually doing. So it's been great.
That's a great way to say it, actually doing, right? That's inventing, making, and storytelling is the world in which we play in the world of innovation. But doing or making, I would consider those the same, but very, very important that you're actually doing things with your hands or your mind to make things happen. So
it's a little of both. And there's the world of the theoretical and the world of the practical, and you got to figure out where that you can merge those two. So I learned a theoretical at school. I learned a practical in the field.
Well said. Well said. Thank you for that. I think they're very lucky over at Ponsse that, they're working with an organization like yours. You are actually utilizing their equipment and identifying potential new needs that you have. And then do you funnel that back into the research and development department at Ponsse? So they're getting real field knowledge from people getting their hands dirty every day, doing the work, and they can then try to strive for the next level over there. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say. We do lots of requests or asks from Ponsse, and we throw ideas at them like, what about this? What about that? They kick ideas back and forth with us, like there's a firefighting water tank that we've just been developing with them. It took 2 years and a back and forth, and now we've got the first one on site, and now that we have our hands on the first one, well, that's generation 1. We've already thought of a bunch of changes for generation 2.
So what caused that to happen? So usually there's a cause and then there's an effect, right? So there was an observational analysis. What was seen in the field that caused that to happen?
Based on the number of fires that we're having, and our company's heavily involved in wildland firefighting, we wanted to see, is there a better way, a safer way to get water out to the field to help reduce these wildfires, to suppress them earlier, with a shorter time frame and safer, and with maybe a little less people, so we can free up resources to go help fight other parts of the fire. Because when a wildfire occurs, they're usually over a large area, and there's a tremendous resource drain, or a lot of folks are needed. So there's limited resources. So how can we stretch our resources out to be more effective with what we do and do it safer? So this idea of taking a forwarder, which we normally use for harvesting operations, and integrating a water supply and a water cannon on it, and packing 2,640 gallons of water out away from the road into the woods, saves time.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. Good innovation, right?
It is. It's great. It's fun.
But all right, so shall we move on?
Yeah.
Let's see here. All right, so let's talk about the future a little bit.
Yeah.
And the next, let's say, if we were to look out into the field of 10 years, 30 years out, what would you think are some of the big innovations that are coming down the pathway here? Is it going to be all like traditional forestry, or are we going to see, AI and technology going into the forest?
We are, and we currently are, and we're going to see more of it. We're utilizing drones in forestry right now and taking photos, and some of the technologies are allowing us to identify where the trees are in the landscape, and the machines know where they are in the landscape now. When they harvest trees, they know where the base machine is relative on the landscape. But I think as time goes on, the machine is going to be able to help us make decisions better about, let's say, a thinning operation where we harvest some of the trees and leave some of the trees to grow. The machines are going to help the operators determine which ones to stay and go to meet a prescription, or what a forester designates as what they want the forest to look like after it's done. We're going to see some of that. There's going to be more innovation between the two machines communicating with each other. So the one that cuts into trees and lays the logs out will send information to the one that's going to go pick them up and get them to the roadside, so it knows where those logs are. There's innovation where the end users, let's say the sawmills or the plywood plants that are utilizing these trees and making products for society, they're going to get the information of what kinds of trees and what the lengths and diameters and volumes are of these trees that are going to be coming to them before they even see the trees show up at their operation. So they can help them plan and manage, do we have enough of a certain size and a certain length for a particular product, or should we switch, and should we make a different size or length of product because our customers are needing something different? So we're going to give them, they're going to have more visibility of the process and inventory management. We're going to basically extend the manufacturing facility out into the forest so they have this raw material information before they get it.
Wow, there's a lot of innovation going on.
There's a ton. And as a forester, as a manager, things that are happening already is I can pull up some information on my iPad, and I can see where the machines are working and what they're producing and where they're on the landscape, and we're going to be communicating with our landowners that way as to where they are and planning for how soon until they're done with their project and ready to move on to the next one, or where we're at in the process. So for mechanics, let's say, the ability for mechanics to remotely log in on a computer, maybe even a state or two away, and reach into that machine and maybe make some changes to it to help the operators out. Or maybe the machine's going to start sending back information like a system is starting to fail. We see a hydraulic pump starting to fail, and we can measure. There's things we can measure to tell when a system may fail and send preventative help out before something actually fails so our operators can stay functioning and productive.
That's wonderful.
So connectivity. I think connectivity in the forest, you think you're out in the middle of nowhere, and a lot of places we work don't even have cell phone coverage.
Yes.
But there's going to be a connectivity connection with these machines with those of us that are maybe not with them that particular day. My office, I have a physical office, but my office is really my pickup truck. And using my iPad or a laptop, I'm connecting with a lot of things that way. Mm-hmm. So my most effective time is actually out in the field and working with other foresters and landowners and working with the folks out in the field. So having this connectivity, I can't be everywhere all the time. It helps me be more productive as well.
Understood. Wow. A lot of advancement. It seems like you're going to get more efficiencies out in the field, a better pattern upon how you're harvesting so that you can plan the future out a little better. Is that a fair way to say it?
It is, and we're going to see advances in terms of fuel efficiencies for equipment and maybe systems that are driving those machines, maybe hybrid-type systems, just like we're seeing with vehicles. It may not be all totally powered by an engine. There might be some electrical components in there, and so maybe some batteries in the machine as well, along with maybe a smaller engine that are going to help drive the machine. So we're going to be able to reduce our fuel consumption, become more efficient, because there are some inherent advantages of electrical drive systems over hydraulically driven systems.
Yes.
So I think we're going to see some innovations in that regard as well. They're taking tech to the woods.
Tech to the woods. I like the way that sounds. I like it. All right, so now you gave me a segue onto Ponsse. We hit a little bit about that organization. Can we take for another moment and talk a little bit about, we can talk about Ponsse for a minute. I'd love to know about who was this that started this company, and is there a story here that might be worth sharing from an entrepreneurial perspective?
Yeah, there is. So entrepreneurship happens globally, right?
Right.
There's entrepreneurs all over this world, and you never know where they're going to come from, but they're out there. And so our story for Ponsse begins in a little village called Vierma, Finland. Vierma, Finland is a little small rural farming community, forestry community, kind of in the middle of Finland. And there's a gentleman by the name of Henry Vigren. And Henry, after World War II, Henry was trying to make a living for his family in tough environment, tough times in Finland after World War II. And Finland's mostly forested. So Henry, of course, worked in the forest, as a lot of folks in rural Finland do. And harvesting trees and hauling trees out of the woods at that point in time was a difficult, tedious task.
Mm-hmm.
Finland's very cold in the winter, and so they was trying to harvest trees. And Henry got to thinking, and this innovative spirit of his, how can we do this better? Because before they're kind of using maybe a small farm tractor and things like that to get these logs to market, and sometimes they put them on a sled and pull them with a horse, and they're like, how can we do this differently? I kind of like to stay a little warmer than being out in the cold all winter long. So Henry helped develop him and he had some friends in a shop, a little shop in Vierma. He developed a forwarder, what we now know as a forwarder, and this forwarder was really innovative because he had a cab on it and a crane on top of the cab, and he could reach over and pick up these logs and put on its back and drive them to the roadside, which was much better than trying to drag them out with a tractor in the cold or maybe on a sled with a horse.
Right.
So in this little village of Vierma, there was a dog that kind of hung around Henry's shop, and it wasn't particularly a very good-looking dog. It was kind of a mutt, but everybody in the village said, when you go hunting, you take this dog with you, because this dog may not look very good, but this dog is a tremendous hunting dog. It really performs. And so when they're in the shop and they're building this machine, it wasn't really the most graceful looking machine, but it was really good at what it did. So they decided to name the machine and actually the company after the dog, and the dog's name was Ponsse. So here we are 50 years later, and the little dog in the village that wasn't good looking but could really hunt is now the name of a very large multinational company.
That is a great story. I've never heard of a company being named after a ratty-looking dog.
Ratty-looking dog. Yeah, I think Henry must have had a pretty good sense of humor too.
It sure sounds like it. So he's an innovator with a sense of humor.
Yes,
that's
yes.
a wonderful combination.
It is. It's good to be to laugh at yourself too, right? It's just.
All right. Well, that's a great story about Ponsse, and well, I can't thank you enough for sharing all your insight.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Tomorrow's World Today podcast. Join us next time as we continue to explore the worlds of inspiration, creation, innovation, and production. Discover more at tomorrowsworldtoday.com, connect with us on social media at TWT Explore, and find us wherever podcasts are available.